Let's bring in our guest who is joining me right now, retired Major General David Fraser, CTV military analyst. General Fraser, always good to see you. I know you were listening into part of what we were hearing there from Canada and from the UK's Foreign Secretary here. The importance of those battle tanks, those Leopards. Canada has some, many other European countries have others. What do you think we're going to see later this week?
Well, Todd, I think this is a significant step up for NATO, led by the UK, of sending in modern battle tanks. The Americans have already said they're sending in Bradley armored infantry fighting vehicles, and the Germans are doing the same. So what we are doing from the West is giving the Ukrainians first line capability to offensively take on the Russians at their own game, and in fact take it up an extra notch. So this really is setting the stage for the offense that will happen in the next couple of months, probably early in the spring, to carry on the shoulders of what the Ukrainians have been doing just before winter set in.
The Ukrainians, General Fraser, as you know, want about 300 tanks and hundreds more of those armored personnel carriers. Do you think that's realistic? I mean, are we actually going to see that kind of donation given by Western countries in terms of the number of tanks?
Well, certainly NATO has those numbers available to them. It becomes down to a political decision of how much are the NATO members, which we are part of, are willing to do. And the other thing too is how much can we push into Ukraine before Russia pushes back and says that's too much. We've already seen at the beginning, the Russians were upset about anything about aircraft. But now we've kind of inched our way in with air defense. We've done it with artillery, and now we've talked about main battle tanks. So this is a bit of a political ballet that politicians are going to have to play, so it doesn't push Russia over the edge.
Yeah, what do you think has changed in terms of that calculus? Where before, the idea of tanks was completely taboo. Now, clearly, it's not.
Well, I think in part it's a function of how much the Russians have been able to achieve on the ground, how comfortable they are with what they think is the capability of the Ukrainians and their ability to respond to the Ukrainians. And most recently, the fighting in Solidar has given the Russians a bit of a propaganda win, not a tactical win, but a propaganda win. And so we are playing right along the edge and the line of what the Russians are accepting what the Ukrainians expect to do to fight them in a war. So it's a bit of a political playing chicken right now.
We're also hearing reports that the Russians could be ready for a quiet mobilization of hundreds of thousands of additional troops, General Fraser, in the next couple of months to push toward sort of a re-invasion of Ukraine. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. The Ukrainians, just before winter set in, had a great offense, pushed back the Russians, inflicted significant casualties. We're now into what I would call it's a preliminary of that offensive that's going to happen. Russia had a partial mobilization of 300,000 troops. They should be getting into the line. They've talked about another 500,000. They've got Gerasimov, their chief of the defense staff, now commanding. We are setting up for the final stages of this war, where the Russians and Ukrainians are going to duke it out with the best weapons and the most manpower we've ever seen. That's why the Ukrainians need all this equipment, and we should be giving them what they're asking for.
Based on your expertise, you look at these tanks, you look at the armored personnel carriers, you look at other armored vehicles that Canada has decided to give as well. You look at the air defense systems like the Patriot missile batteries. The Ukrainians will be getting at least 2. I mean, is that enough, do you think, as we look at pictures of Canada's Defense Minister, Anita Anand, who is in Ukraine today, a surprise visit there? Is that actually enough to help the Ukrainians win this war, General Fraser? What do you think?
Well, the numbers that we've seen so far is really just a token. It's a significant step forward of what we are prepared to support them with. And it's going to be our collective contribution, and how big that collective contribution will be, whether or not that it will give Ukraine the offensive capability necessary to expel the Russians out of Ukraine. And so we have to see what happens later this week with the defense ministers. How much are they prepared to give Ukraine? Is it enough for the offensive punch necessary to push back the Russians. Right now, the numbers aren't big enough, but they are indicative of where we are going, and we'll have to see whether those numbers add a zero to it. If they add a zero to it, now we're talking about a real offensive capability.
General Fraser, always good to see you. Appreciate you letting us tap into your expertise as always.